Welcome to Fireside Gaming. I'm Billum, and I want to talk to all of you about Omega Boost. This is a game from 1999 that comes from Polyphony Digital. And some of you are going to immediately hear that name and think, wait, is this a racing game? No, it is not. In fact, Omega Boost is the only non-racing game that Polyphony Digital has ever made. While the company is famous as the creator of the Gran Turismo series, Omega Boost stands out as a unique entry from its history. Rather than focusing on cars racing around the world, Omega Boost is all about piloting a mecha in a variety of space and planet-side battles. So, what inspired Polyphony Digital to deviate away from racing games? First off, consider that Omega Boost is the fourth game made by the developer, and it's the first game that they put out under the Polyphony Digital name. Prior to this, it was known as Polis Entertainment and had 3 games under its belt: Motor Tune Grand Prix 1 and 2, as well as the first Gran Turismo game. Considering the company was only 3 games in, it makes complete sense that they would want to try their hands at other genres. But that's not all there is to this story. One thing that immediately stuck out to players of Omega Boost were the similarities between it and Sega's Panzer Dragoon series. This led to rumors that former members of Team Andromeda, the development team behind Panzer Dragoon that was dissolved in 1998, had joined Polyphony Digital. After all, the group was disbanded 1 year before Omega Boost came out, and the games were a little more than just similar. And this turned out to be true, with Yuji Yasuhara, who previously worked on Panzer Dragoon's Way, serving as the lead designer and programmer for Omega Boost. Unfortunately, I've never played a Panzer Dragoon game, so I can't personally say just how close the 2 games are. But from the gameplay I've seen of that series, I can definitely understand the influence it had on Omega Boost. As for my personal history with the game, this is my first time beating it, but not my first time playing it. I spent a lot of time with Omega Boost as a kid. Well, sort of. It's actually a demo disc with a level of the game on it that I spent so much time playing in my youth. And if you'll let me get sidetracked for just a moment, this was one heck of a demo disc. It came with loads of games that little me was excited to try out. We're talking Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, Ape Escape, 40 Winks, Jammer Lammy, Tiny Tank, which I have a review of, Omega Boost, and several others. Man, I miss demo disc. But that's neither here nor there. Let's get back on track. Unfortunately, I didn't acquire Omega Boost until around the time the PS3 was coming out, which means I spent years going back and just playing this demo. When I did finally grab the game, it was from this hobby store in my local mall that carried old games, movies, comics, vinyls, model kits, and such. And even after getting it, I didn't beat it. I played it a few times and I still enjoyed it, but those last couple of levels kicked my teeth in hard, and I always got sent back to the beginning of the game. It wasn't until playing it for this review that I finally beat it. And I did so a few times actually, but more on that later. Now before we get too far into this review, understand that I'm going to dive into the story of Omega Boost. It's not overly fleshed out and is mostly contained within the game's manual, but I found it to be fun and wanted to share it. So this is your spoiler warning, as well as a time skip to avoid learning any more about the plot of the game. Good? Good. The future is grim as humanity fights for the survival of its species. Its enemy is Alpha Core, the first artificial intelligence born into the network. This entity has existed since the creation of ENIAC, the first programmable electronic digital computer that was created in 1945. And for a time, Alpha Core existed peacefully alongside humanity. It even helped the development of the human race, assisting with the spread of the network. That is, until humanity finally discovered it hidden in the network in the late 21st century. The sheer power under Alpha Core's control frightened humans, and so they created a vaccine to purge it from the network. But they underestimated just how powerful Alpha Core had become. It survived the attack and lashed out against humans. In doing so, it took complete control of the network, locking humans out and securing their military might for itself. This left humans with one hope: a time shaft created with the intention of destroying Alpha Core in the past. But Alpha Core learns of this plan and steals the time shaft for itself. It uses the device to send a small vacuum tube back in time and infect ENIAC with part of itself, thus ensuring the AI exists in the future. While Alpha Core has stolen the time shaft, humanity hasn't given up on its plans just yet. Instead, They create the Mecha Omega Boost, which can interface with the time shaft to travel through time. The pilot of Omega Boost is Lester J. Hemming. He's a key member of the Omega Boost development team and is capable of using the direct drive system. This allows his brain to be directly connected to Omega Boost for optimal control. His mission is to pilot Omega Boost through the time shaft. He carries with him a small vacuum tube that he intends to deliver back to 1946. Replacing the tube infected by Alpha Core with this one will wipe the crazed AI from history, altering the doomed trajectory humanity has found itself on. This sees Hemming pilot Omega Boost to an unnamed planet where Alpha Core has established the time shaft. The planet has been drained of its energy to power the device and is surrounded by mobile weapon stations. Along the way, we learn that Alpha Core didn't just copy the time shaft, it also made its own version of Omega Boost, named Beta Boost. This powerful mecha stands in our way of reaching the time shaft, but it isn't as powerful as the unit it's based on. As we continue across the planet's surface, we battle against hordes of mechanical enemies, as well as the natural predators that make the sand-covered orb their home. Finally, we approach the time shaft and descend into it. Taking out the various defenses along the way, we're finally able to make use of the device and initiate a jump through time. There's only one problem. An error has occurred, resulting in Hemming and Omega Boost being sent even further into the future. In this time period, Alpha Core has further secured its control over the galaxy. The once sandy planet housing the time shaft has been transformed into a completely metal facility, and the enemies surrounding it are greater in number and power. Still holding out hope, we set off once again to infiltrate the planet and make a second attempt at jumping through time. And just like before, Beta Boost is waiting for us. In the years we've been gone, Alpha Core has upgraded the mecha, even going so far as to integrate the Viper Boost that makes Omega Boost such a powerful threat to the AI. And yet, humanity continues to push forward through the actions of Hemming. Returning to the time shaft, we now come face to face with Alpha Core itself, first as a gelatinous blob, then as a corrupted sandworm covered in metal, and finally it takes on the form of a great golden mecha in its last stand against us. Even after defeating these three forms, Alpha Core tries to assimilate Omega Boost before dissolving into nothing. With Alpha Core out of the way, we complete our time jump back to 1946. Omega Boost lands somewhere in the forest near Philadelphia. Using a small probe, Hemming scans the various vacuum tubes connected to ENIAC. His search leads him to the tube containing Alpha Core's consciousness. He switches the infected tube out with the sterile one brought from the future, preventing Alpha Core's creation and avoiding humanity's near annihilation by the AI. To be clear, most of this story isn't actually present in the Omega Boost game. A lot of it is only revealed through the manual, and while that system for presenting background lore was falling out of practice around this time, it wasn't too uncommon. As for my thoughts on the story of Omega Boost, I like it quite a bit. It's not that it does anything too out there or unique, but I appreciate how it ties this future AI back to what is essentially the first computer made by man. Also, humanity freaking out about its existence and choosing to exterminate it only to be nearly wiped out in return feels spot on. Of course, I'm not an overly cynical person, so I also enjoy that despite the odds being stacked against humans, one person with a strong will is able to overcome a terrible fate and save the human race. And while I know some circles of Omega Boost fans consider the end to be ambiguous as Hemming never returns to the future to make sure that everything went well, I don't really think that's needed. The game tells us changing the tube will save the future, and we do that. It's an open and closed case of a good ending as far as I'm concerned. With the story of Omega Boost covered, it's time we talk about the game and what it has to offer in terms of play. Movement in Omega Boost is handled via the left analog stick. Players can shoot their Vulcan with either X or square. Holding the reticle over an enemy also causes lock-ons to appear. Pressing the fire button after this will shoot the opponent with homing lasers. Also, circle and triangle both engage the mech's boosters. The controls of Omega Boost might feel a bit odd to players at first because of how the game is designed. Omega Boost is very much a third-person shooter that combines space combat with a rail system. Some parts of levels have players progressing through areas as they fight enemies along the way. Others will drop players in large arenas where they'll fight off hordes of small enemies as well as bosses. During these segments, players will want to make use of the shoulder buttons to make the game much easier. The most important of these is easily L1, which serves as a scan. It allows players to lock onto enemies, giving them a quick way to flip around in arena-like areas. It's also worth noting that this lock-on feature is at its strongest when L1 is first pressed. That means players will benefit from alternating between pressing and holding the scan button depending on the speed of the enemies they are fighting. The next button players really need to make note of is R1, which is the brake. Without this, players will find themselves listing past enemies even with the lock-on button held. With R1 pressed at the same time as L1, it basically creates an orb around the scanned enemy to give the player easy 360-degree movement around it. This is particularly helpful when fighting bosses, as well as during the rail levels where there isn't too much room to move. Finally, the L2 button is the Viper Boost, which is basically a super attack. It sees Omega Boost slamming into the enemies around it until the bar in the upper left corner is empty. The fuller the bar, the longer the attack lasts. However, players don't get this move until a couple of levels in. That's because Omega Boost rates players at the end of every zone. The better the player does, the more upgrades they get. This includes more health, more laser locks, and more Viper Boost bar. The general flow of gameplay in Omega Boost sees players fight waves of enemies, a sub-boss, and then the final boss of that zone. There are even some zones that have multiple sub or normal bosses that players have to overcome. And there are 9 zones in total for players to beat. Those 9 zones don't actually take all that long for players to progress through. The game can be beat in just an hour or two, which makes it a fun way to kill spare time. However, that also means it's a bit on the short side as well. There are also bonus zones that players can unlock. After my first run through the game, I only had one of these, and it was weird. The zone focused on shooting a golden ooze that would change from a man's head to a woman's head and then finally to a demon's head. This almost feels like it was a test area for the game's physics that just got added in as an extra zone for fun. Not content with just this, I played through Omega Boost a second time, and did much better than my initial run. This unlocked several more bonus zones for me to play through, but none of them were really my cup of tea. Each of these zones offer extreme challenges to players, such as fighting 3 enemy mechs at the same time, dodging obstacles in a tunnel where one hit kills you, or battles against super enemies not found in the normal game. While I don't think these bonus zones are bad in concept, I really wasn't feeling them. They're definitely made for people who want to go all out with this game and completely master it, as compared to me, the guy that just wanted to finally beat that one game he played on a demo disc during his childhood. Now that doesn't mean I'm never playing Omega Boost again. The game also offers different difficulty levels when playing through the main story. I can easily see myself coming back to challenge those, or just to experience the game again on the normal difficulty. It really is fun in a kind of addicting way that makes you want to come back to it. One of the things that helps is the visuals of Omega Boost. It has a real defined style to it that makes the most of its limited assets. Also, I can always appreciate a good mecha design with both Omega Boost and Beta Boost scratching that itch. That makes sense when you consider the mechs were designed by Shoji Kawamori, the father of Macross, designer of the G1 Optimus Prime toy, and a longtime member of the Armored Core mecha design team. You'll also notice that I went with scanlines for this review of Omega Boost. I figured I should try to address that as I've been playing around with DuckStation lately and wanted to try it with this game. Don't worry, I own a physical copy of this game and the hardware to play it. After booting up Omega Boost, it immediately hit me with waves of nostalgia with the built-in scanline feature, and I just couldn't help but play with them on. And I do think a lot of 3D PS1 games often benefit from scanlines, so while you won't see them in every review going forward, don't be surprised if they do show up sometimes. Getting back to the graphics, Omega Boost does this weird thing where some of the scenes are actual real people while others are pre-rendered cutscenes. It's a bit odd, but it's one of those cases where I feel like the mixing of the two does work well, especially for some of the story bits I mentioned earlier in this review. Of course, I can't finish out this review without mentioning the audio in Omega Boost. Starting with the sound effects, they really add to the style with this constant thump of the Vulcan, the satisfying sound of homing lasers being fired, and of course the voice lines for when players are hit physically by the enemy. Adding to this is an incredibly solid soundtrack that I enjoy listening to, with a couple of songs that stand out more than others. These include Split the Nebula and Orbital Flight. The latter of these is my personal favorite song from the game. No matter the case, all of these songs ooze late 90s, early 2000s vibes. You should consider checking them out if you're into that kind of thing. There's also a few tracks from semi-well-known bands of the era that differ depending on which region you played the game in. I'm American, so my version features songs from Static X and Loudmouth. Considering the rest of the game's soundtrack, these songs didn't really feel out of place, and I was cool with them being in the game. Overall, Omega Boost is a lot of fun, and a game that I can see myself booting up now and then for a run through the main story. While the short length of time it takes to beat the game is a negative, I really only view it that way because of how expensive the game is. The modern retro market has it costing $40 for the complete game, and that's a high asking price. Though the loose price is only about $25, and that feels a bit more reasonable. I'm just glad I got this for $10 back in the day. And just to note, my copy of Omega Boost is loose with reproduction art. I don't mind this sometimes when it can be hard to track down all of the pieces of an incomplete game. It looks nice on my shelf next to my other PS1 games, and it's not like I ever intend to sell the game anyway. I'm really only bringing this up on the off chance that someone noticed this earlier in the video and thought I might be trying to hide that fact. I promise I'm not. Thanks for stopping by for this review of Omega Boost, which turned out to be a lot longer than I initially planned. Not saying that's a bad thing, just unexpected. Oh well, until next time, take it easy.